Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest, absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, Southern Appalachian Herbs at blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs. Hey, y'all. Welcome to this week's show. It is a chilly, cloudy fall day here, and it's I guess right before Halloween, and it's supposed to warm up tomorrow. So it's sort of an odd fall we're having. That said, it's absolutely beautiful. The leaves have been spectacular this year. On the mountain, they seem to be a lot of gold and yellow, and that's usually a sign we've had a lot of rain, and we've certainly had a lot of rain. If you come off the mountain a little bit, like last week, I traveled through, yes, even with a broken ankle, through Moxville and Asheboro, North Carolina, and the colors were fantastic. Spoke with a friend; he had just been from in Greensboro, and said it was some of the prettiest leaves he had seen in that area. It was just the reds of the dogwoods. Uh, the pear leaves this year are a purplish red. They're just gorgeous when the sun hits them. And really, the crepe myrtles are gold and red, and I mean, it's really nice. And of course, the maples. I mean, the maples, up in my area went kind of gold, but off the mountain, they're just a deep crimson red, that when the sun hits them, they just spectacular. Really, really nice this year. So hopefully you'll get a chance to get out and see some of this beautiful fall color. It's it's sticking around a little bit longer this year than it does some years. A lot of times, like I said, that's first snowstorm comes in early and we get heavy, strong winds and ice and it just takes them all down immediately. But this year is really, really nice. And on a day like this, you know what I'm thinking? Turkey. I am thinking it is time to roast a turkey, to smoke a turkey. I love to do smoked turkey. I'm a barbecue fanatic. I mean, I have a tradition of pitmasters in my family going back to before America was a nation. Barbecue really started in really North Carolina on the coast, and kind of spread from there into Virginia. And if you read the writings of George Washington, barbecues at that time were big political events, as they should, well, as they really still are today. I mean, they always should be, but unfortunately, people don't cook barbecue the right way anymore. Real barbecue is cooked over hardwood coals, not over gas, not with electric. I'm sorry, all you grill masters. The real deal is cooked directly over live hardwood coals. As the fat from the meat drips down, it hits those coals and it makes an aromatic smoke, and that's really half the flavor. You take that away, you don't have real barbecue. I'm sorry. But this is you know, I would love to be smoking a turkey today, and I think I will be very soon because there's really nothing like smoked turkey. I mean, I love smoked pork, I love smoked beef, it's all good. But barbecuing a turkey is a tradition I do just about every Thanksgiving, and I'm so looking forward to it. I'll at least have a pork butt over some coals pretty soon. Uh, this nice chilly, damp air is perfect for barbecue. You know, when it's done right, that blue smoke rises off the pit, and on a day like this, It actually goes up and then it goes back down. And you know it's just enveloping that meat, giving it such a wonderful flavor. But speaking of food, apparently everyone was not happy with my podcast last week. There's a little respiratory virus going around, and I've had it. I've got it. Like last week was pretty tough. And, it's not that herbalists don't get sick. It's just we have the herbs on hand to take care of things when we need them. So I am, of course, treating myself with herbs and getting a little better each day. But this thing has really knocked a lot of people down. It's sort of a flu. I guess it's a flu that's going around. I don't think it's another variant. But last week's show, I did not have a lot of breath. I just barely got through that one in 30 minutes. And I left out the recipe that I had promised. I said, with my new cookbook having come out, I would try to talk about an herb each week, as I always do. And this week, herb is going to be a really fun one. It's going to be a really surprising one for a lot of people. It's one you probably have in your spice cabinet in one way or another. It's coriander. Coriander goes by different names. It actually comes in different forms, and a lot of people are going to be very surprised by this herb, which is strongly medicinal. Coriander and its other variants, which we'll get into in just a minute, have been used in herbal medicine at least since ancient Egypt. Once one of the most valuable and important medicinal herbs known to man. Seems I have a train passing by not too far in the distance, and he's just trying to blow his horn a lot for some reason. I guess the tracks are 3, 4 miles from here. It's where I'm sitting today. I'm not home, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago. I'm spending a lot of time in the middle of the state this winter as I'm trying to get over this broken ankle and, everything that's going on. But here we go. He seems to have stopped now. Coriander is really fascinating, and we will get into that. But I wanted to do the recipe because, like I said, people said, "Where was the recipes?" All right. Let's get down to one of those really foundational aspects of cooking. Okay, this is key to just about everything I do. If you know anything about my heritage and the way people of my heritage, they always talk about start with a roux. What is a roux? Well, a roux is simply a combination of any kind of fat you like. I think this guy is stopped on the tracks, actually. He's just sitting on the tracks blowing that horn. Well, anyway, I hope it doesn't distract you too much. It is me, it's distracting me. Um, so you take any kind of fat you like and combine it with an equal amount of flour and brown it. You cook it until the raw taste is gone from the flour. And that is the base of so many sauces. It's the base of like all Cajun and well, a lot of Creole food, but Cajuns are fanatics about their roux. And the same is true, of my largely Huguenot heritage with a bit of Cajun influence, a bit of Creole influence. We love our roux. Well, why do we love our roux? We make gravy. Gravy is, as my favorite comedian, James Gregory, says, where I come from, gravy is considered almost a beverage. And that is absolutely true. I love gravy. I'm a gravy fanatic. I mean, gravy over rice, gravy over mashed potatoes, gravy on that nice sliced roast or smoked chicken. Love gravy. Well, how do you make gravy? Well, take an equal amount of, say, oil or butter or, fat that's been rendered, like some good beef fat or some pork fat, whatever you like. Put it in a medium hot pan with probably keep it a little on the cool side. Go for about medium. Put in equal amount of flour. Now, for a single guy like me, I'm going to be doing about a tablespoon of fat to a tablespoon of flour. If you're cooking for a large family, you might want to do 2 tablespoons of both. You don't need a lot. If you want to go Cajun style and you're making a gumbo or something like that, they get absolutely fanatical about it. Like I said, for some reason, this idea has gotten kind of taken hold, I think, with the celebrity chefs and such, that you have to make a very dark roux. They will cook that roux down until it is so close to being burned that it is like take your eyes off it for 1 second, stop stirring for 1 second, and it's burned. They talk about a black roux, a chocolate roux, a brick roux. One of my favorite cookbooks is actually Paul Prudhomme's first cookbook when it comes to authentic Cajun food. Paul Prudhomme, he was great. And he actually had a pictorial guide in this book showing different colors of roux, which is heresy these days to people who think they know everything about, Cajun cooking and such. He would make a light roux, just a blonde roux, as he called it, just very barely tanned that flour. It's yellowish or, tan, almost khaki color. He would make a light brown roux. He would make a dark brown roux, a medium roux in between. Then he would get into the brick roux, where the flour actually becomes sort of a reddish color. And then he would make the chocolate roux and the dark, almost black roux. And you use different roux for different recipes. For a gravy, we just want a brown roux. We're going to cook that fat and flour, stirring it together until it turns light to medium brown. Then we'll add in some stock, or you can even add water. If really some of the best meals, and the way my grandmother did this, one of my favorite meals is what we call country style steak. You take usually a chuck roast or maybe a shoulder roast, an inexpensive, somewhat tough, but very flavorful piece of beef, or you can use deer meat, you can use whatever you like. You cut it against the grain into thin strips. I mean, like small steaks, no more than say 2 inches wide by 3 to 4 inches long. I mean, that's as big a piece as you want. You can certainly make them smaller, but they should only be between a quarter and a half inch thick. And the tougher your cut of meat, the more thin you want to cut them. Put that in a pan and brown it. Brown it well on all sides in fat. What I mean by brown, I know a lot of people don't know this, but you take the meat and you put it in a pan and you turn it to about medium high, and you leave it. You don't touch it, you don't stir it, you don't move it around. You don't put so much meat in that pan that you're going to crowd the pan. If you put too much meat in the pan, as it cooks, water comes out of the meat and it will actually pool in the pan and it will start to simmer, and you're actually simmering or boiling your meat. You're not frying and browning. So just enough, spaced far enough apart so that it's frying in the fat and it's not touching each other and it's not crowded enough to simmer, really, or steam even. Leave it be. You can salt the top of it while it's sitting there. You should. When the juices come up to the top, when the meat has, the reddish juices, which are actually myoglobin, they're not blood. Some people call it blood, but it's actually the juices of the meat because the meat has been bled out. Um, when it comes up to the top, check it and see if it's got a nice caramel colored brown on the bottom. If it is, flip it over, salt the other side. Do the same thing. As that meat browns, take it out of the pan and put it on a plate, put it on a dish, just sit to the side somewhere. Then in that same pan, you're probably going to want to add a little more fat, brown up some onions, chop them, put them in there, cook them down, make sure they're nice and soft. They've got a nice brown color. I do not like crunchy onions in my gravy. That drives me nuts. I can always tell when someone doesn't know what they're doing. So I end up with meat that isn't brown or onions that are crunchy. And like I said, I don't want crunchy onions in my gravy. Cook them. Now you can either push the onions to the side of the pan or take them out and put them on the same plate with the beef. That's up to you. It depends on how big your pan is and how you are doing these kind of things, right? You now have in that pan all the flavor from the meat and onions. It's just kind of sitting there on the bottom of the pan. Uh, Add to that pan equal part flat fat and flour. Stir it gently, just keep stirring it until it's brown. Cook the raw taste and smell out of the flour at the very least. I mean, if you were going to do a very light colored chicken gravy or something and you didn't want a rich brown to it, you would only cook it enough to get the raw flavor out of the flour. For a nice beef gravy, which is what I have in mind right now, you're going to cook it till it's a nice medium brown. Then you can add to it just water. Stir it, make sure it doesn't lump up, bring it up to a simmer, and it'll turn into a nice thick brown gravy. Better yet, add to it some chicken stock or some beef stock, even vegetable stock or broth. As we discussed a week before last on how to make stocks, you can make stock out of any kind of bones. You can make stock out of shellfish. You can make stock out of vegetables. It doesn't matter. And that is actually preferable than water. But I'm telling you, if you just add water to this pan in which beef and onions have been cooked, you're going to have a wonderful gravy. Now I have helicopters going over. You can tell I'm not home because I am not, I'm used to hearing birds. I am not used to hearing trains, cars, and helicopters. But I'm spending, as I said, a good bit of the fall and winter off the mountain as I'm recovering from this broken ankle and helping out a relative. And it's a little different. It's definitely a little different around here. My dog Buddy is not used to being walked on a leash, for instance. And there are leash laws, and he's having to adjust to that, and I'm having to adjust to a lot of things, especially having a yard full of deer and squirrels that I cannot harvest. And someone asked me, "What do you mean harvest?" Well, I mean shoot them and turn them into meat. Okay, harvest is the nice way of saying that. Anyway, that's how you make gravy. You literally just cook together flour and fat and add the liquid of your choice. If you were doing sausage and you wanted sort of a nice thick gravy to do with that, you might do flour, fat, and some beer. If you were doing a German style meal with sauerkraut, that's very, very good. If you were doing a more French style meal, you might add a little stock and some red wine. But I'm thinking just a simple brown gravy like we love in the South. There you go. That is one of the most foundational techniques in cooking, and it will change your life. If you think gravy comes out of a can or a carton or a little packet of powder, trust me, that's not gravy. That is an abomination. Real gravy is made in a pan with fat and flour, stock, water, whatever you want to add to it, and it is so absolutely delicious. No person should have to live their life without real gravy. Now, hopefully the helicopters have passed by and the train's gone, and we'll start talking about coriander. Boy, you can tell I'm near Fort Bragg right now. Let us talk about coriander. Coriander is, well, it's the seed of a plant. You may know the plant as cilantro, or you may call it Chinese parsley. That's actually what it used to be called until recently. Really when Mexican and South American cooking became popular, people started discovering cilantro. Well, coriander is the seed of cilantro. And we're going to talk about the plant as coriander, even though, keep in the back of your mind, it's also cilantro. Coriander is one of the few herbs mentioned in the Bible. It's mentioned that when the manna from heaven came down, it had a texture, perhaps even a taste, like little wafers made of crushed coriander seed, coriander ground into a meal. That manna from heaven, that little wafer, is, of course, the ancestor of the communion wafer that you might have at church, depending on what denomination you are. So you can imagine these little white, thin wafers of bread made from coriander seed. It was also mentioned as being one of the tithes that was used. It was, I think, even King Solomon may have mentioned it. Anyway, the use of coriander, like I said, goes back as far as archaeological evidence of any herb beds. I mean, literally in pre-pottery Neolithic culture. This is preserved in caves in Israel. They have found coriander stored away. People were obviously growing it and harvesting it to use. That was somewhere around 8,800 BC. It was used in Egypt quite a bit as a medicinal herb. It was found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. It was mentioned in the Ebers Papyrus, which is one of our oldest herbal references going back to about, 1,500 BC or so. It this is an herb that has been part of our culture, our life. I mean, the human has used coriander as long as we know the human has used any plant, essentially. And it does have a lot of religious significance in several cultures. Now, you may be thinking, um, okay, you may be one of those people who really hates cilantro. It's interesting because the seed of coriander is very different. We don't use coriander seeds much these days. I do because I pickle a lot. Any mix of pickling spices usually has coriander in it. If you like pastrami, if you like corned beef, well, more pastrami, but sometimes corned beef, it's usually pickled, preserved, brined using coriander along with other herbs. It's a flavor you know. Um, it is very different, of course, than fresh cilantro. I happen to love fresh cilantro. I remember when I first encountered it when I was maybe 10 years old or so, I thought it smelled and tasted like soap. But eventually I developed a taste for it. But this is the interesting thing about it. There is a genetic factor in how people taste cilantro. To some people, it tastes really good. To me, it tastes really good. Once I got used to it, I mean, I couldn't imagine having salsa or pico de gallo or many of the Mexican foods I love and many of the Chinese foods I love without cilantro. To some people, though, it really is quite disgusting. And it all depends on your genes. Your taste buds are different. And it's really interesting because that smell I said that it's like soap. Apparently, the ancient Greeks thought it smelled like stink bugs. You know what stink bugs are? They're a beetle. They put out sort of a scent. They're like, little tiny skunks or something. And they thought that cilantro smelled like the scent that a stink bug releases. And that's actually where the name comes from. It was known as corian or corianum in Greek. And going back to Dioscorides, he had a very interesting mention of coriander in De Materia Medica, which is really the best source for Greek herbal medicine, ancient Greek herbal medicine. He said it was a cool herb in his way of thinking. You can think of cilantro. It does seem to have a coolness to it, whether in flavor or just handling the plant. He said as a result, it would help heal erysipelas. Now, erysipelas was a skin infection. It's actually the streptococcus virus which causes it, and ulcerated sores. He said was basically saying it would help with inflammation. He said combined with honey and raisins, it would cure pustules, these like infected blisters, which would be caused by it. He said it was good for inflammation from urinary stones. It would help with kidney stones and bladder stones and gallstones and such as that. Good for carbuncles, which are infected boils. So again, he's talking a lot about these skin infections, which were very common in the ancient world. He said, bruised and applied topically again, it would help dissolve scrofulous tumors. This could have even been goiters. It could have been inflamed lymph nodes, which were infected, or it could have even been goiters. Um, he said it was good for inflammation of the bones. He said a little of the seed taken and drunk with raisin wine, which was called passum, would expel worms and promotes the creation of sperm. He actually thought it was very good for, virility and fertility. But this is the interesting part. He said if too much is taken, disturbs the understanding dangerously, and as a result, men ought to avoid the excessive and frequent use of it. Now, this is, I had to do some research on this. I had absolutely no idea that large amounts of coriander seed have a narcotic effect. Apparently, they do. Apparently, they create some kind of intoxication and a stupor, even. He recommended that the juice of the plant, crushed, mixed with something we absolutely do not use anymore, with lead, an ore of lead, mixed with vinegar and rosacea, that's rose water essentially, would help with inflammations of the skin. Now, obviously, we don't want to get lead poisoning, so we're not going to use it that way. That was very common in ancient Greek medicine to use certain heavy metals that really kind of faded out of practice for a while, and until Paracelsus, really looking into the use of metals and toxins in the 1500s, began to do certain experiments. And he was really the one that we can credit for better or for worse with things like chemotherapy and such. So it's not that odd of an idea, but of course, you know, we don't want to get lead poisoning or mercury poisoning or anything like that. In more modern terms, and then I'll go back to the ancient use. I want to talk a little bit more about the narcotic properties of the coriander because this is something that really probably should be warned about in many herbals, but we've just come to take coriander so for granted. It's just something in the spice cabinet. And the seeds, of course, are a spice, whereas the plant itself is an herb. Plants for a Future gives a little warning. First of all, they say that coriander is commonly used as a domestic remedy. It's especially valued for its effect on the digestive system. For treating flatulence, diarrhea, and colic, it settles spasms in the gut and counters the effects of nervous tension. The seed is aromatic, carminative, expectorant, narcotic again, stimulant, and stomachic. It is often used with active purgatives in order to disguise their flavor. Of course, it has a good flavor. They're just talking about the flavor aspect of it. But the raw seed chewed to stimulate the flow of gastric juices and cures foul breath. It will sweeten the breath after garlic has been eaten. Some caution is advised, however, because if used too freely, the seeds become narcotic. Externally, the seeds have been used as a lotion or have been bruised and used as a poultice to treat rheumatic pains. The essential oil is used in aromatherapy, and it's an appetite stimulant. Now, we think about how this once almost sacred herb, this very medicinal herb, came into our common use in food. Well, you have to remember, in times before refrigeration, meat began to spoil very quickly, unless it was, dried into like some kind of jerky or biltong or something like that. Fresh meat had a very short shelf life. To counter the taint, to give the meat a longer shelf life, and to cover up bad flavors, people started using herbs. They started rubbing the meat down with various herbs that have antimicrobial properties, with garlic. I was speaking with a lady in Italy just, I guess it was yesterday or the day before, and we were talking about, the difference between the regional cuisines of, say, Western Europe and Britain, the British Isles. If you think about English food, we don't think of it as being very heavily herbed or spiced, right? I think about a wonderful, English style roast beef. About the only herbs that are going to be used on it would be thyme, onions, obviously, sage, and it's fantastic. Whereas, just skip over a little bit and you're in southern France or you're in Italy or you're in Spain, and this meat's going to be heavily spiced and heavily seasoned. Well, the reason for that is England is a cool, damp climate. They had, well, first of all, meat was more abundant. They had a lot of really good pasture. They had excellent beef. I mean, it's a beef culture. They had a lot of good woods full of acorns and other nuts to feed pigs. But you get a nice fresh roast of beef. In England, it didn't need a whole lot of messing with it. It just needed to be cooked properly, and they are absolute artists of roast beef. Well, if you think about the traditional English larder before refrigeration, they could take a side of beef and hang it in there for weeks, and it would just dry age. Well, you go down to the Mediterranean region, you go down to hot areas like Italy, for instance, and that same meat was going to begin to turn. It was going to begin to rot. And so they had to put a lot of garlic and they had to put a lot of other spices on there, not only to help prevent and slow the turning of the meat, the degradation of the meat, but to cover up bad flavors. So really, that's where a lot of the really delicious cooking from the Mediterranean region originates. Not so much as, I mean, they weren't necessarily thinking we're going to use all these herbs and spices to make meat taste better. And that was just an aside. It was to make it actually edible. And so coriander would have been one of those essential herbs, well, essential spices essentially, to help cover up the bad taste and aid digestion because it stimulates digestion. It helps settle the stomach. It helps with flatulence. It helps with diarrhea. It helps with all the above. So that's really how the coriander became, a spice we might use with pastrami as opposed to something in the medicine cabinet. And the leaves, the cilantro, so to speak, along with parsley and other herbs like that, have antimicrobial properties. these mints have antimicrobial properties. They would actually help preserve the meat and keep it from spoiling longer. So in the ancient world, by the time we get to the Holy Roman Empire, coriander, cilantro, whatever you want to call it, was absolutely commonplace. It was expensive. It could be used to pay taxes. And when the Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne wrote what was called the Capitulaire, which was a really interesting document. I've spoken about this, I've written about it a lot. He wanted peace and prosperity in the empire. He wanted people to have food, he wanted people to have medicine. Benedictines at the time were going out and founding hospitals, free hospitals to bring in, people from all over Europe, and they had physic gardens. They had gardens where they grew herbs. Well, Charlemagne wrote this letter, essentially an edict from the emperor, saying these vegetables should be grown in everyone's garden, and everyone should have a garden at their home if they have a little bit of property, and that food should be shared with the poor. And these herbs should be grown in every medicinal garden and used by the Benedictines and others, herbalists at the time, to treat people for their health. He was very focused on the health of the empire. And the coriander was one of those herbs. It was an herb he actually ordered to be grown, and it would have been used for both food and medicine. In the monastic tradition, well, I mean, coriander was very well used. By about 1900, the monastic tradition had really evolved into what we now call German folk medicine. German folk medicine was that very same Benedictine school of medicine that continued to be practiced throughout all the Germanic speaking regions. And Father Nape from Germany was a great herbalist. Father Kunzel from Switzerland was a great herbalist. One of the best writers of the time, one of the most comprehensive herbalists, was Brother Aloysius. And he wrote of coriander. He said it's used internally to expel wind, that's bloating, that's flatulence, etc., and strengthen the stomach. It aids digestion. It's good for a mucus stomach, mucus in the intestines, for nausea, diarrhea, dizziness, arthralgia, which I'm not exactly sure what that is, intermittent fever, and as a preventative for stroke. And that's a unique use. I don't see that showing up very often, but he believed that, and apparently it had been practiced at that point for about 15, no, about 1700 years. Coriander had been used medicinally and in the monastic tradition was believed to be a preventative for stroke, which is very interesting. He said the bruised herb, and that's going to be the cilantro part of it, was used externally for inflammations, carbuncles, and ulcerations. The seeds steeped in wine used to promote menstruation. So very medicinal uses then. Now, going back a few hundred years, we're going back to the 1500s in England. Gerard said that coriander seed, prepared and covered with sugar, taken after meat, closeth up the mouth of the stomach and stayeth vomiting and helpeth digestion. Of course, this is all Elizabethan English. What's he saying? He's saying it aids digestion. There's no such thing as closing up the mouth of the stomach, but let's say you had had a little meat that was a little off and you were getting maybe a little something close to food poisoning. Coriander would help settle the stomach and help the food stay down and help you digest it so you didn't get sick. It's very practical use in a time before refrigeration, and a reason that the herb, the cilantro, has been much used and is still much used to this day, in Mexico and South America and such. Some of the best food in the world is made in Oaxaca. Oaxaca is, by American standards, remarkably primitive. They still use herbs as a preservative and make some of the finest food in the world. Honestly, Oaxacan cooking is just peerless. But anyway, he said the same herb, he's talking the seed, parched or roasted, dried in an oven, and then steeped in wine, would kill and bring forth intestinal worms. That's another very traditional use. That's another use for cilantro in South America and parts of Mexico. He said that it would stop the last bloody flux. We're talking serious diarrhea, bloody diarrhea, and other extraordinary issues of blood. And I don't, he could be talking internal bleeding, he could be talking menstrual bleeding. I'm not sure in his terms exactly what those extraordinary issues of blood were, but I think we kind of get the idea. He said he said the seeds sufficiently and well dried, added to vinegar and wine and steeped, kept for when you need it, but for at least 24 hours. With He said the way to prepare it, he said the way to prepare the seed was to dry it well, really well, and then pour over it vinegar and wine and keep it back for at least 24 hours. I'm thinking this would have stored for a very long time. And keep it as a remedy on hand for whenever you had stomach issues or whatever you needed. The green leaves of coriander, he recommended being used for the king's evil. Now, that's the scrofulous tumors, that's the inflamed, infected lymph nodes. Use of the leaves mixed and ground up with a mortar, essentially is what he said. Labored with a leaden mortar. Okay, so he's saying ground up with a mortar. Um, Combined with the oil of roses and a litharge of silver. So by the 1500s, they had realized that lead, as Dioscorides had recommended, probably wasn't very good, but they were using silver in the same way. And you notice it's a very similar combination to what Dioscorides said would cure the St. Anthony's fire and take away all inflammations whatsoever. We're probably talking here sort of like shingles. So that it's an interesting and useful remedy. You may see that sometimes in drugstores these days we see silver sulfite. Silver sulfite is a really excellent topical lotion for wounds, bed sores. It's used in so many different things. I remember one time I was at my grandparents' and a storm had taken down a limb of a pecan tree. And I just, being young and full of myself, went over and grabbed an axe and just chopped the whole thing up. And I didn't have gloves on, and I hadn't been chopping wood for a while. And my hands were just blistered and bleeding all over before I realized it. I guess my hands were out of condition. I'd been chopping enough wood that winter. Uh, my grandmother had some silver sulfite cream. I rubbed that on there, and by the next day, they were completely healed. The blisters had dried in, the sores had stopped bleeding, all soreness was gone. Really, really remarkable remedy if you can get some. I believe it's prescription only. But going back to the 1500s in England, where he's essentially saying use that silver sulfate with oil of roses and cilantro as a remedy for shingles. So I mean, I can definitely see the logic in that. He said the juice of green coriander leaves killeth and poisoneth the body. I have no idea why he would say that. I think maybe the English really didn't like cilantro because I've eaten a whole lot more than 4 drams of coriander, of cilantro, and I'm still alive. But the seeds, well, and then again, I did not have like serious, like concentrated, is what he's saying. Maybe it could be very bad for you. The seeds of coriander, prepared with sugar, prevail much against the gout. Really good old remedy for gout. Like what we actually know about cilantro now is it helps remove heavy metals from the body. The gout is often caused by iron deposits in the bloodstream. They kind of collect in the big toe, lowest part of the body they can find. And that is a very legitimate, cilantro is a very useful herb for removing heavy metals from the body, and that is a very legitimate use for cilantro. And he recommended anybody with gout take a quantity before dinner on a fasting stomach, an empty stomach, and then after dinner, and then again in 3 or 4 hours. He said, if it be taken with meat, it causeth good digestion. And he also recommended, interestingly, for ringing in the ears or like roaring in the ears. Yeah, and that is an interesting use. Now, getting more up to modern times again, but we're still in the British tradition. Miss Grieve Remember I said the English don't like cilantro? She said at the time the inhabitants of Peru are so fond of the taste and smell of this herb that it enters into almost all of their dishes. But the taste of it is often objectionable to anyone but a native Peruvian. Both in Peru and in Egypt, the leaves are put in soup. The seeds are quite round like tiny balls, and they lose their disagreeable scent upon drying. They become more fragrant the longer they are kept. True to a point, they do get stale after a while. You mentioned it having been introduced from the east to Rome and brought to Britain by the Romans as an aromatic and stimulant spice. It has been cultivated and used from ancient times, and it was employed by Hippocrates and other Greek physicians. And she mentions how Pliny the Elder had said that the name comes from the stink bug, essentially. And it was much used apparently in northern Africa and have in Europe, it was really more popular, at least by the 1930s, as an additive to gin. It's one of the flavorings for certain craft gins. And apparently, also in the 1930s, it was used by veterinary surgeons as a drug for cattle and horses. And there was also a popular candy made in England at the time using coriander seed, and it was used sort of to settle the stomach. But she said officially its medicinal actions are stimulant, aromatic, and carminative. The only word there that would give you trouble, I suppose, is carminative. It just means settles the stomach. The powdered fruit, fluid extract, and oil are chiefly used medicinally as a flavoring to disguise the taste of other medicines. And she also says if the seeds are used too frequently or too freely, they become narcotic. A water made from coriander was esteemed an excellent remedy for windy colic. Going back to that concept that coriander gets its name from essentially a stink bug, there's a really good book called The Drunken Botanist by Amy Stewart. And if you're interested in all those, old-fashioned European herb-infused wines and liqueurs, I guess you would say, that really descend from herbal medicine. I mean, many of those, if not most of them, began as herbal remedies created by the Benedictines and other monasteries. And, we're talking absinthe, for instance, or Pernod. They often have somewhat of a licorice flavor. There's usually wormwood in there, and anise and different things. Vermouth is an excellent example. Vermouth is actually the name is Old German for wormwood. If you think about the vermouth that you put in a martini, it's actually a wine that was created by, I believe it was the Benedictines. It was one of the monastic orders hundreds of years ago as a wormwood-based herbal remedy. Well, coriander is used in many of these. Now, why in the world does it not have an objectionable taste and smell, right? Well, um, Amy Stewart tells us that there are two main oils in the coriander seed. The first one, and the one that's very recognizable when it's fresh and apparently smells like stink bugs, or as some people might say, cilantro. It has a soapy smell to it. It evaporates as the seed dries. And then this next oil that is available and is easily extracted into alcohol is contains linalool, thymol, and geraniol acetate. Now, geraniol is the scent essentially of geraniums, and that is what comes out in the liqueurs. And it kind of has a scent, as she says it combines the woodsy notes of thyme, the rich perfume of geranium, and a bright floral citrus flavor of linalool. So, obviously it's quite tasty when used in that way and very medicinally active. So, whether you like cilantro or not, I mean, like I said, I absolutely love it. I cook with it all the time. I grow it. It's one of my favorite herbs. You'll probably like coriander. And the uses of this herb are so wide and varied. Definitely have it on hand. And the next time you got a little upset stomach or something like that, grab a few coriander seeds and chew on them. Just don't use too many because, that's my disclaimer for the week. Uh, from what I can understand, from what I've read, that the narcotic effect of large amounts of coriander is a very unpleasant, intoxicated stupor. It's not the same effect you might get from drinking gin or pastis made with coriander seeds. So, y'all, that wraps up the herb for this week. And, like I said, it's just for Halloween. And I was thinking earlier when I was talking about James Gregory and gravy, really my favorite Southern comedian and writer of all time was Lewis Grizzard. Of course, I went to the University of Georgia. That's where Lewis Grizzard went to college, and he never lost his love for Athens, Georgia. Funny guy, very outspoken conservative, very he would be canceled very quickly today in cancel culture. Let me just put it that way. He was not politically correct, and his books are hilarious. His comedy routines are hilarious. You may remember a guest appearance he did on Designing Women back in the 90s. So that just shows you how much things have changed. I mean, Designing Women was one of the greatest sitcoms of all time, and it was written by the Bloodworth Thomases. Now, they were incredibly liberal. They were big fundraisers for the Clintons, and to think that in the 1990s you could have the very liberal Bloodworth Thomases and the very conservative Lewis Grizzard, and Dixie Carter was also very conservative. Whereas I can't remember her name, the one that played Charlene, she's very liberal. These people got together and made one of the best sitcoms, of all time. And things have changed so much where people can't even stand to be in the same room together. I think we need to get past that. We need to start accepting people as they are and accepting their differences and, seeing our common humanity once again before we just fall apart as a nation. But anyway, Louis Grizzard, he was always making fun of Georgia Tech. There's this huge rivalry between the University of Georgia and Georgia Tech. He was he said one time that, Georgia Tech had this wonderful school of for undertakers. They did such a good job that Leroy and Bubba had graduated from the Georgia Tech School of Undertaking or whatever they call it, the mortuary school, and they were practicing, in a little town south of Atlanta. Well, there was this old gentleman in the town who was very bent over, very hunched, away. And of course, they had to figure out how to get him in the coffin, and he was bent, kind of in half. So they pushed down on one end, and he'd raise up on the other end. You know how that would go. So they got some bungee cords, and they strapped him down real good. Well, in the South, especially if you're Baptist, we have a tradition called setting up, and it goes back to the time when people used to perhaps fall into a coma and they may be presumed dead, but they weren't really dead. So the tradition is you bring the coffin into the home, you put it in the front room or the parlor, and the family sits up with the coffin, the open casket, all night, at least all night to the next day when it's time for the funeral. So Lewis's friend was a little boy at the time, and it was his Uncle Eck that passed away. And so the little boy's sitting there with the father and his uncles, and they're going to sit up with the dead all night. And they're sitting there, and eventually, it starts getting late at night, and the older uncle said, "Y'all, it's getting late. If you're going to sit up with Uncle Eck, I'm going to go on to bed. I can't stay awake any longer." They said, "Okay, go on to bed." Then the next one, and eventually his father says, son, I can't stay awake anymore. If you're going to sit up with Uncle Eck, I'm just going to go on to bed." So it's just a little boy sitting in the room with the coffin. And about that time, some big storm comes along, big thunderstorm, and lightning's flashing and thunder's banging, and those bungee cords snapped. And Uncle Eck comes raising up in that coffin, sat right upright in that coffin. That little boy looks at him and says, "Uncle Eck, if you're going to set up, I'm going on to bed." He ran out of there as fast as he could go. So, y'all, that's my little Halloween story for you. I don't take Halloween quite as seriously as I'm afraid a lot of people do. Being Catholic myself, I'm just going to go to All Souls Mass and All Saints Mass and continue to celebrate those who are more alive than we are on earth in heaven, as Catholics have done for about 2,000 years. But if you're one that thinks it's some, you know, demonic pagan tradition, I hope I didn't offend you with my little story. But I think it's always just good to remember those good old Southern traditions. And y'all have a great week. Enjoy these beautiful colors. And I'll try to sit here and keep my sanity with all the trains and helicopters going over for a while. Let's look forward to that turkey. Have a good one. The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, for your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.